it goes right, it's a slice. If it goes left, it's a hook. If it goes straight, it's a miracle. This is Out of Bounds. If it's happening in the world of golf, we're talking about it. Coverage, debate, discussion, pro golf and local golf. Let's do it. This is Out of Bounds. And here are your hosts, Nate Sharman and Josh Durso.
Welcome to the Out of Bounds podcast. Tony Finau is a PGA Tour winner once again. I'm Nate Sharman. That's Josh Durso. We're here to break down all the golf for you this past weekend. Like I said, Tony Finau and Victor on the PGA Tour. Over on the LIV Golf Tour in Singapore, Talor Gooch gets it done in back-to-back weeks. He wins over there to take the individual prize. We'll talk a little bit more of that later. But Josh, let's talk about some of this PGA Tour action. A fun pairing with Bhatia, the Ashke Bhatia, the young 21-year-old phenom. Jon Rahm and Tony Finau battling out in Mexico on the final round. But Finau was able to hold that lead and get it done.
Yeah, really interesting. Fun to watch despite it not getting very close at any point. Tony Finau was in pretty good control the entire time. There were a couple moments briefly where it looked like maybe the world number one would be able to make a charge, but at the end of the day, he just wasn't able to take advantage enough of those opportunities. As you mentioned, actually, Bhatia, he was really played beyond his years this weekend, given the names that he was surrounded by on that leaderboard the entire time. And then in this final group today, to play the way he did, even though he did have that stretch in the middle that took him out of contention. I think great showing for him. And I actually defend that little bit of a rocky stretch in the middle. I defend it based on the tournament kind of getting out of hand or getting away from those guys who weren't Tony Finau. So
you got to really push at that point, right?
Right. Like you get to a point in that tournament where if you're 5 strokes back, I think at that point, before his first bogey on 9, I believe he was around 17 under par and Finau was around 20, 21 under par. And, with the back 9 basically coming at you, you're going to have to make up a lot of ground. So your mindset changes. You do some things, especially when you're a younger guy on tour, that maybe you don't make the smartest decisions. And yeah, I think it's not a win, but he's getting very, very close to being one of those guys that could bust on the scene and rack up a couple wins here in short order because he has the game to do it.
Another guy that played well too is Brandon Wu. He held the lead with Finau at some points today. He had a costly double bogey in the back 9 that kind of made him out of it at that point. But another good young player playing well too. So that's really awesome to see. But you're right about Tony Finau. Every single time when I was watching that he would either hit his second shot into a bunker, greenside bunker, or miss the green, he would have a miraculous third shot to get up and down. There was a couple times, I think it was on 6 and 9, he was in the bunker. And he had what felt like tough shots, maybe not the hardest shots in the world, but ones that can be really tricky, especially with the lead on Sunday. And Tony hit great shots to get up and down on all of them. I don't think he made a bogey today. So just really, really incredible by Tony Finau to get that done. So let's keep talking about Finau now. That's a 6th PGA Tour win, his fourth win in about 10 or so months. And it's just pretty incredible for a guy like Tony Finau. We've heard so much about him with Full Swing. His family going to every event with him and traveling with him throughout is a really cool story. But I want to talk about Tony in the majors. We have one coming up at Oak Hill PGA Championship in just a few weeks. Josh, what's your thoughts on Tony Finau in that tournament? And are you buying any stock after this win for Tony Finau at PGA?
I'm not buying any stock, but if you give him a lead on Sunday, I think he could play within himself and get the win. It's odd because he looks so unflappable when he's in control like he was today, right? But it seems like there are so many weeks where, we'll talk about the favorites coming into a tournament and he'll be in that top 5, top 10 discussion. But then he'll just never be a factor the entire weekend. And I think it kind of goes to like the challenge with a Tony Finau and watching him and trying to predict how he's going to play. He is one of those guys that needs to start well in order to win any tournament. And, predicting that in a major is so difficult. It's hard enough in a normal tournament, right? But in a major at Oak Hill, that's going to be tough. I don't see that. I don't see it happening. I'm not buying stock in it. But a good win for him this weekend. What about you? Do you think there's any, argument there to buy some stock in him ahead of the championship?
I think it's definitely reasonable to buy some stock in Tony Finau. I would be cautiously optimistic with him. Just one thing that kind of scares me a little bit with Tony Finau, I know this is really hard to say after, he gets a win against Jon Rahm, right? It's just, we see him win at sort of these quote unquote lesser field events, right? He won a couple times last fall. He now wins this event. He's won in Puerto Rico. His other event being a playoff victory, which was against a very strong field. Yes. So that's one thing that scares me about Tony Finau. And I think that goes to what you said, Josh, where he kind of has to have a lead, right? You don't see a guy like Tony Finau kind of chase down the leader very much when he wins. This week he shot 64 on Friday to kind of really kind of pad his lead throughout the week. Rahm made a really great run at him on Saturday. He shot 61. He was on 59 watch for most of the round. So that was pretty incredible by Jon Rahm. But I think I'm cautiously optimistic with Tony Finau. I would love to see him play well, and I love to watch him when he's playing well because I love the way he holds himself on the golf course. He's very confident, and I like the word you said earlier, Josh, unflappable, right? Nothing really bothers him. He's got 4 or 5 kids, so there's not a lot that's going to bother him in life in general, right? He's learned that. So He's a lot of fun to watch, especially when he's playing well like that. So I would love to see him play well at Oak Hill, but I'm just cautiously optimistic. If we see him come out with a 73, 74, I know that's really tough, but if he comes out on Thursday at Oak Hill and shoots 68, you can't not have faith in Tony Finau to play well at the PGA. So I think it's going to be tough for Tony, but I wouldn't put it past him.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, and we are going to talk about a little later. Our final discussion topic is that group of guys who are majorless, but the 8 best golfers in the world, and I won't tease it beyond that. But he's definitely a part of that crew. There's no doubt there.
For sure.
Good weekend for
talking about Jon Rahm.
Yeah, I was going to say, good weekend for Jon Rahm, even though he didn't win, right? I mean, it's still a spectacular showing.
Yeah, it comes in solo second. Now amasses about $14.5 million in winnings on tour. We talked about Scottie Scheffler last year, who had that incredible year. Nope, Rahm's already beat him. Yep. I mean, the purses have been increased this year, so that's one thing, but it's just amazing. Jon Rahm, 4 victories on tour this year, now adds a second place finish at the Mexico Open this weekend. And we still have 5 elevated events left. We have 3 major championships left and the whole FedEx Cup playoffs. It's reasonable that Jon Rahm could win $40 million on tour this year. I wouldn't put it past him.
Wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, I mean, it's just
unreal.
It's the new normal, though. Like, this is the kind of money that's in play for these guys. And the interesting thing is it really doesn't take. We've seen guys get hot over the last, I'll say like 5, 6, 7 years. If you combine those streaks that we've seen, you think about the Spieth run between, 15 and 16. Justin Thomas has had a hot streak in there. Scottie Scheffler had a hot streak in there just literally a year ago. If you took these numbers, these purses, and you applied them to those streaks, you would see this kind of outcome. So yeah, I think, Jon Rahm, at least in the short term, is going to set the bar pretty high for what dominance looks like in terms of annual winnings here. But it's something I could easily see another player in that top tier, even Jon Rahm himself, the following year going out and eclipsing it. Just because the
Tiger Woods is taking a look and saying, what could I have won back when I was in those years?
Oh my God.
He was just winning every single weekend, right? It's remarkable.
Yeah. It's a different world now. I do think we're going to see, looking at what Rahm won today versus what he's amassed thus far. I do think that we're going to see the top tier guys kind of cool on the non-elevated events and maybe sit some of those out based on, this weekend was a grind for Jon Rahm, and he played because he essentially wanted to do the right thing. But truth be told, he could have done something else with his time, and it probably would have been a better use in the grand scheme of things, because I don't think a week when you're Jon Rahm and you're playing as well as you have been, you didn't gain anything from this weekend. You're still the best player on the planet by a mile.
But that's the way he holds himself, right? If he makes a commitment to something, and especially with that tournament being in Mexico, how many fans you could add to his cabinet and to the game of golf too, right? Just the PGA Tour mainly has events in the United States, and they go to a different country, and the amount of fans they pick up just by doing that, and having the Masters champion and defending champ Jon Rahm come to that tournament just means so much. I'm wondering if Tony Finau goes to that event next year. Probably, right?
Oh yeah, I bet, as a defending champion. So, absolutely. Yeah.
But I also wonder if they start to do anything on tour with these non-elevated events. I don't think they make a rule, but do they ask these bigger guys to not play, or somehow have some sort of under the rug notion that we don't really want you guys to compete in too many of these non-elevated events? It'll be really interesting to watch. I don't think they'll definitely won't make a rule, but will they kind of ask them?
I don't know. I think there could be a rule eventually, because I
don't see how they can stop Rahm and Finau from going to that event, because it, like I said earlier, means so much to Mexico and the sponsors.
I agree. I just think that in this new world where you've essentially got these non-elevated events serving as, qualifiers for elevated events for the non-guaranteed players, there are going to need to be guide rails in there so that those guys actually have ample full opportunity to maximize those opportunities, because that group is literally going to, say what's going on here if those guys are playing in these tournaments every week because they just know they can. I think the one thing that's kind of been overlooked in this whole discussion about elevated events, maybe LIV was partly to blame because of the emphasis on some guys over there wanting to play less. I think a lot of these guys are cool with playing the full elevated schedule plus some of the non-elevated events too, because they're professional golfers and they love playing golf.
Right. So, Jon Rahm absolutely loves playing golf. He has a couple different press interviews where, I think it was after the Masters, they asked him when he's going to pick up a club next, and he said, maybe I'll take a day off, but then the 100% he'll have the club in the next day. He goes, I'm addicted to this game. That's one thing he said. So that's pretty cool to see.
And we've seen a lot of guys this year so far play in non-elevated events that they didn't have to play in. Jordan Spieth has played in a couple. This idea that, without putting a rule in place that these guys are just going to naturally separate themselves, only play in elevated events if they qualify for those, and never play in the other events if they don't. I just don't think that's going to naturally happen by itself. It's not going to happen organically. But
agreed.
All right,
let's talk a little bit about Singapore and talk about some LIV.
Yeah,
how about that? Talor Gooch becomes the first back-to-back champion in LIV history. Takes home the $4 million prize in a playoff against another Spaniard in Sergio Garcia. So another win for Talor Gooch, and I just really want to look at the money earnings for Talor Gooch first of all here. He takes that home, like I said, the $4 million individual prize, won that $4 million prize last week, now has won in just these two tournaments, and just the individual, mind you, because they win more money for their team, which we haven't even talked about yet. He's won over $8 million in those two events. He won $9 million, or a little over $9 million in 121 PGA Tour events. So 2 LIV Tour events that he won, of course. He won almost as much as his career earnings in 121 events on the PGA Tour.
Name of the game.
That's shocking.
I mean, that's what that's this new normal. I mean, it's to say, you mentioned.
How can you blame a guy to go? How can you blame a guy to go to LIV when a guy like Talor Gooch can make just so much more money? I don't know if you can really argue his decision was wrong, right? I mean, he's setting up himself, his family for eons to come. So it's just incredible for him, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, if this all just boils down to money, if this, I think a lot of the animosity in the beginning with the LIV PGA thing was hiding it under the guise of, growing the game.
Right.
It's not about growing the game. It's about money, and it's about maximizing your own financial situation. And for Talor Gooch and every other guy who's gone to LIV for the most part, it's probably worked out times a billion. And, kudos to him, more power to him. I think everybody's kind of, nobody really, I think that's passed, right? Like, it doesn't really seem like too many people in the golf community are all that worried about that. But, for Talor Gooch to be LIV's first back-to-back winner is kind of an odd. Obviously, it's not what they would have wanted, right? Like, we can all acknowledge that if it's,
but there's worse options, I think.
Is there though? Like, I'm not throwing any shade at Talor Gooch, but like, Cam
he's one
Smith,
on tour. I mean, he's not like a random person.
I know, but it's just, you've got names, and in terms of what LIV is trying to do, which is grab market share from the PGA Tour, you need real name. You need your firepower brand names to be the ones that do the things that like this.
Right.
I point to a guy like we just talked about, Bryson DeChambeau last week, for all the wrong reasons. That's a guy that if you asked LIV last year who they would want to be their first back-to-back winner, that's the guy. That's the guy 100%. And yet, here we are with Talor Gooch becoming LIV's first back-to-back winner on a tape delay event.
Yes, on a tape delay event. We'll get more into that. Let's tidy it up here. Range Goats win. Talor Gooch's team, 37 under par. They won by 3. Fireballs, which is Sergio's team, was in the playoff. Yep. Coming second rate with the Crushers too, right? Nibbling on their tails. So Brooks plays well again, which is one more thing to note, I think, from this event, golf style. He is at 16 under, misses off that playoff by a stroke. We saw how good Brooks played at the Masters, almost won the event. He could play well at the PGA, right? I don't think there's anyone that says that they're not expecting Brooks to play well at Oak Hill in Rochester here in a few weeks.
Oh, look, I know it's way too early, but I think if recent history is my indicator, and that's what I'm working off of when I try to figure out who's like a favorite or considered a favorite, Brooks Koepka and Pat Reed are favorites. Big.
How can you not think about favorites. Phil Mickelson too, who's played well again and now has multiple top 15s on the LIV Tour this year, a top 5 at the Masters. Maybe not. Yeah. I mean, he's almost 53. He's going to be that in a couple months. Won a major just a couple of years ago. So I would expect him to play well at the PGA too. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself with PGA talk, but I'm just so excited for it, just being here in our backyard. So I don't expect these guys to not play well again. They're stringing together good starts, quality starts after quality start. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're around at Oak Hill.
Yeah, no, I agree. And like I said, I think a couple of those guys, at least in my mind, they're atop the list in terms of favorites coming in. Next LIV event, LIV goes to Tulsa, May 12th through 14th, and then they're going to be in DC. Got a couple American stops here, which means we won't be watching on tape delay. That's great because I hate tape delay, if you couldn't tell already. You posed an interesting question. I want to get your thoughts before I throw my 2 cents in there. Should LIV Golf only do international? Should they exclusively stay to the international world?
I'm torn on this. It starts to me and says yes, because they've just had so much success the last few weeks. We saw Australia be a huge success. LIV Singapore was a little bit less on that scale, but I think still a success. You didn't see as much social media as you did the week before. I think maybe part of that was because they're back-to-back weeks. So that's just kind of tough to drum up more social media hype around it. Yeah. But I think the reason they can't is because of sponsors. They have some American or a lot of American-based sponsorships that pay a lot of money for this LIV, that paid a lot of money to be involved with the LIV Tour. So I think getting that to be non-US on US soil, some of the events would be challenging. Also, I think the players, I think there might be a little bit of, I don't know if it's in their contract with some of these guys that, they got to play a certain amount of events in America, because some of these guys that are, especially Americans, aren't going to want to spend a lot of their time away from home, right? I mean, that's just as a person, you want to be at home, right? So I think would be a really interesting point, but I think they can really find a good niche business plan out of the States if they do that. Josh, what do you think?
You know what? Like I think in principle, it would be better if they were exclusively international. But in terms of finding your audience and monetizing that audience and securing sponsors long-term to make sure that your events can continue, I think you have to have a bunch of stops in the US because that's where you can make the most money. Like, we talked last week about how great Australia was for LIV, but LIV is never going to make the kind of money in Australia at a tournament that they could make in the US compared to the PGA Tour or whatever the case may be. And I think that just goes back to like the consumption habits of Americans versus other countries. They're, the sit and watch audience is pretty big here in the US, whereas in other parts of the world, if it's not soccer, there isn't a big sit and watch contingency. And that's the biggest challenge, I think, for LIV or any sport trying to branch out and create, eyeball demand on a consumable product. So it's tough. I think in principle, yes, they've had better luck outside the US. I also think that over time they could get better in the US and actually have a better following. I think they just need time. And, I always wonder with this now, when you have this mixed bag of international and non-international events, at what point is one taking away from the other? You know what I mean? So like American,
especially back-to-back weeks.
Right. Like American fans are getting all amped up and say they go to an event and they have a great time. And they're like, oh, this is awesome. I want to go again. And they like look on the calendar and they see that the calendar is pretty like short. It's not a long season and limited stops. And then they see that there's a bunch of international events that are going to be on tape delay. So they're not even really going to be able to watch it on TV. And by the time the stop finally gets back to them, or they can possibly get to another American stop, it's kind of like they lost that moment to catch them, right? Like right. LIV lost that opportunity to catch that and convert that customer. That's just kind of like the way I look at that kind of issue. I don't know.
I wonder what it compares to people watching, Americans that is watching on tape delay when the round is over, right? When you see what kind of happens, especially today, who won the event in the morning. I wonder the percentage of people that are watching on tape delay versus Americans streaming the event last night at, I think it was like an 8 p.m. tee-off time in the Eastern time zone. I'm curious to see, because I bet you there's a good amount of people that are watching, that are streaming it live, right? You would think you have a lot of night owls that just love to watch sports, even if it is 1 a.m. in the morning, they want something to watch, especially on a Saturday night.
I'd be curious to see the numbers, and I'm sure by the time our Wednesday show happens, those numbers will be out for this past week.
I hope so, yeah.
I'd be curious, but you know what? I think about streaming in general. Sounds great on paper, but we saw what LIV did when it was streaming on YouTube on a service that's way more available, way easier to get to, and most Americans are very familiar with using. So I don't know. I wouldn't have a ton of faith in that, honestly.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's shift gears and let's talk about the topic that I've been amped up to talk about all day long. So Golf Week had a story setting up some debate ahead of the PGA Championship. Who are the 8 best players in the world without a major championship right now? In no particular order. The list includes Sam Burns, Patrick Cantlay, Tony Finau, Max Homa, Victor Hovland, Xander Schauffele, Cam Young, and Will Zalatoris. Obviously, Will Zalatoris will not be participating this weekend, or I should say in a couple weeks at the PGA Championship. He is out indefinitely because of that back injury. But all of that aside, if you had to ride with one of these guys off this list for the PGA Championship, who are you going to ride with?
Xander. I'm going to take Xander out of that list of 8.
Really?
And it's just really interesting with some of those guys because you look through that list and you're like, wow, that guy hasn't won a major. Max Homa, right? Patrick Cantlay is the one that really sticks out to me, right?
Yeah.
And Patrick Cantlay has been a prominent player on tour for a good amount of time now. And I wouldn't be surprised if he gets the victory. You know, he's been playing well too. And so is Xander Schauffele. So I'm going to take Xander from that group, but I don't think I would disagree with you I think you can make an argument for almost anybody on that list. Josh, who are you taking?
You know, I look at that list and the thing that stands out most to me is that Cam Young is in his second year. Guy's so young compared to the rest of them. But I
see what you did there.
Patrick Cantlay. To me, you know, for all the crap that he gets about playing slow and whether he does or doesn't play slow, whatever his attitude toward it, he's just always around. Even in the elevated events, he's just constantly hanging around. He's always in contention. It feels like he's literally just a couple good holes any major weekend away from winning one of these majors. I would like to see him win the PGA Championship, honestly. I think he would be a very interesting winner for the Oak Hill Rochester venue. Yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised if he's hoisting the trophy on the 18th green at Oak Hill. I think that's going to do it for this. What was that? One more thing?
I do have one. It's kind of the opposite. Who do you see as like the least likely to win a major out of that list?
Wow, that's hard. I feel like I'm going to slight anybody in that group. Do you have a pick? I'm still thinking.
I do. Victor Hovland. I think
he played so well at the Masters, though.
Yeah, but you know what? We also saw some holes in his game at the Masters, too. In particular, his short game. His short game has notoriously not been that great over the last 2-3 years. It's kind of been the one hole in his game, if you can say that. All the other guys are complete. They're complete players, and they bomb it. The other one, and I don't want to slight him because of injury, but Will Zalatoris is kind of a giant question mark at this point because of his back. Like we hope he comes back 100%, but we have no idea if he's going to come back 100%.
Right. I think I leaned Sam Burns on the list, and I don't really have an answer for you.
Wow.
I don't have an answer for you.
Well, that's fine. You said it.
I think
you said it.
It's either him or Cam Young for me. I know Cam Young's is really early in his career. I wouldn't be surprised if he wins a major. But yeah, if you're listening to this, go bet Sam Burns to win at Oak Hill. You'll probably come out with a nice payday on that. We know how bad I am at picking. So
Sam Burns, worst golfer out of that list. That's what I just heard.
Oh man, I'm never gonna forgive you for blaming Tony Finau right in the fall, and he rips off 2 straight wins,
back-to-back wins.
So I'll never be.
You called them weak
in the dumps as much as you for that. You
called them weak field wins. I'm gonna clip that moment and I'm gonna bring it back so I can just remember that all the time you give me crap for that.
Well, they aren't the strongest field. Maybe weak was a little harsh, but lesser field events. How about that? It's a little bit nicer to Tony Finau. I feel like we're kind of piggybacking on the guy after he gets a victory. So
sugarcoat it however you want to.
Oh man, he deserves it because he's played some good golf. But yeah, that's gonna do it. This episode of the Out of Bounds podcast. We'll be back on Wednesday to talk about the Wells Fargo Championship in Charlotte, North Carolina. For now, you can head on over to our website at Out of Bounds Golf Pod to find all the latest news in the golf world, as well as our TikTok and Instagram for more fun stuff. Posted a fun video, Josh. I'm not sure if you saw it from the DP World Tour of the guy making a tough swing and the ball only going about 30 feet and him laughing it off. Thought that was a really fun video, and I was excited to share that one with everybody. That is for sure. And while you're here on YouTube, subscribe. And most importantly, whether it's down the middle or out of bounds, keep on swinging.
You've been listening to Out of Bounds. If it's coverage, debate, or discussion of pro and local golf, we'll be talking about it. Be sure to visit the website at fingerlakes1.com. Find us on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter at OutOfBoundsFL1. See you next time on Out of Bounds.